In 1997, fashion designer Gianni Versace was gunned down in broad daylight. It was a culmination of 3-month, 2,500-mile rampage. As the clock ticked, the body count rose, and with it the question, why had Andrew Cunanan, a good-looking and popular young man, embarked on this devastating killing spree? Hey Anonymites, welcome to the first episode of Artsy Conspiracy, a series where I make mediocre art of criminals while I discuss their heinous crimes, the aftermath of the crime, and the psychology behind these killings. This episode, let's delve into the case of Andrew Cunanan, one of America's most wanted spree killers, who killed the well-known fashion designer Gianni Versace. Before I begin, I would like to make a note that today's episode contains themes of brutality, gore, homosexuality, and suicide. Hence, I recommend viewers below age 13 to listen in presence of supervision, and if you are sensitive to such things, you may join me in another episode. So let's begin. In 1997, Miami, Florida, the city enjoying a renaissance after a period of decline, the neighborhood of South Beach leading the way, a new reputation as flamboyant and glitzy playground for all the clubbers, fashionistas, and playboys of any sexual orientation was developing. Miami Beach was a very upcoming place, and South Beach had just been discovered in the 90s, and people were starting to flock Miami. They were paying top-notch dollar for rooms that were once $1 a night. So it was a big change in this area that became the mecca for war of modeling. It became a mecca for designers coming down from New York and Europe. Miami was made desirable by this one particular man called Gianni Versace. He dressed everyone from the opera style to the film stars to royalties. He was without a doubt the most famous fashion designer in the world. Gianni Versace was famous for his fashion design, but here in Miami Beach, he was famous for just being Versace. People took notice wherever he was in town. People especially flocked near his house, and they always wanted to see the house. One such onlooker was 27-year-old Andrew Cunanan. On July the 15th, 1997, South Beach was waking to another perfect morning. Within half an hour, one of the world's most brutal spree killers would claim his highest profile victim yet. Versace had come to pick newspaper at his doorstep at 8:55 a.m. Cunanan now had spotted his prey. He's already decided what he's going to do. He's got a gun in his pocket. He's not drunk, he's not high on drugs, he's just high on what he's about to do. Versace was allowing himself into his own gated quarters. Cunanan snuck up behind him and shot him at point-blank range. Cunanan escaped once Mr. Versace was shot. The killer now fled northbound to Ocean Drive. It didn't take long for the celebrity murder in Miami to become breaking news. This whole area was filled with satellites, TV dishes, and dozens of news reporters, and it soon began to emerge that Versace was victim number 5 of a killing spree that had begun 3 months earlier at the opposite end of the country. Despite the global spotlight days after Versace's murder, Andrew Cunanan was nowhere to be found. How did an infamous rampage killer end up in Miami on a hot summer day? And how did a boy from San Diego suburb grow into America's most wanted man? Andrew Cunanan was born the youngest of four on August 31st, 1969. Indulged by his parents, Cunanan was brought up in a modest surrounding to his Filipino father and devotedly religious mother in a crime-ridden suburb of San Diego County. His father was a stockbroker. His mother, Mary Ann Cunanan, was a bit of a doting mother. It was only when his mother, Mary Ann, inherited some from her father, her family was able to afford and to move slightly upmarket to an area which wasn't as dangerous as the previous one. From the start, his father in particular encouraged young Cunanan to be status conscious and instill in him a sense of self-confidence that would last him a lifetime. Andrew's first day at high school was one of California's wealthiest seaside communities. Like many immigrant parents, they also wanted the son to have a better life, and they had a dream of a country home that he could afford in. And they were willing to sacrifice and sort of be very submissive and subservient so that he could have a lifestyle that they would wish. The esteemed bishop was one of country's top college prep schools and a breeding ground for future movers and shakers. Andrew studied in this college. One thing Andrew was determined to do was to never let his classmates know that he came from a poor background. In fact, his education was stretching his parents' finances, and this meant that he made more and more stories about himself, and he tried to give an impression that he came from some sort of high upper class family, and we know he didn't come from that. And Andrew lived in a bit of fantasy world. Like, for example, he liked to pretend that he's Sebastian from the novel Brideshead Revisited. He carried a teddy bear around campus, and this need to conceal and to act, basically, indeed making his entire life a stage all the time, continued throughout. Andrew's charisma and good looks were powerful, and he wasn't afraid to use either. He had this ability to charm and become quite manipulative young man. The warning signs of the man that Andrew was going to become were already there. He was psychopathic. Tendencies of the psychopathy started at an early age because he became adept at being very shallow-faced, a different persona for what the situation required. Andrew had a gay veneer that was a part of his, and he gave the impression that he was gay. He was basically the center of universe on campus. He was a giant explosion of personalities. But soon the stage of bishop wasn't enough for Andrew. After graduation, he gravitated towards homosexuality and in a neighborhood called as Hillcrest in San Diego. The Hillcrest area is like very lively. It is a great place to be gay, and at that time was a sensational opportunity for anybody coming from anywhere in the country to be out and proud. Hungry for the high life and worshipping fame and celebrity lifestyle, he began dating wealthy older men who provided for him. Andrew loved the freedom and reveled the opportunity to parade. Andrew had years of successfully negotiating his way through high California society, and thanks to his patronage of sugar daddies and well-meaning friends. Andrew Cunanan actually used to be gay to climb up the social ladder through his ability to seduce and be seduced by older men in powerful jobs. He didn't hold a job, yet had a nice car that he would drive around. He would even wear high expensive clothes. It felt like he had it all. For almost 10 years, he had enjoyed being a fixture in San Diego's gay community, a charmer who talked big and partied hard. Andrew was a showman. He had a story for everything. But as he headed towards his 30s, Cunanan was faced with more beautiful younger men fighting for their place in the social spotlight. As Cunanan progressed into his late 20s, he realized he was slightly over the hill for the gay party scene. Here is where his fall began from grace. He was once rarely dropped by any of the richest benefactors, but now these benefactors were rejecting him. They were turning their backs onto him. They doubted the truth in his stories. He had this underlying insecurity compounded by an act that wasn't like kind of working for him anymore. Cunanan was feeling increasingly isolated. He may have a wide social circle, but he had few true friends. To make matters worse, Jeffrey Trail, someone he was particularly close to, had moved from San Diego to start a new life in Minneapolis. Closely following Trail to the North Star State was another of Cunanan's ex-lovers, David Madison, the one he called the true love of his life. Dave was an architect and he had this really nice demeanor. And Andrew kind of felt abandoned when he saw the friendship between Jeffrey Trail and Dave Madison increasing, and this kind of made him feel like the ultimate betrayal. And the happier they seemed to get, the angrier Andrew became. He wanted a confrontation, and he was now prepared to leave San Diego by holding a final get-together act with his friend, which he dubbed as the Last Supper. Andrew had a very unique personality. Like, he was a grandster and he was very flamboyant. He was a very gregarious individual. The usual life and the soul of the party was what he was, and it was very uncharacteristic of him to be subdued. It was not typical, but on this Last Supper, he was very withdrawn. He just told his friends that he was anxious about his new start, but little did they know that this was the beginning of the end. April 25th, 1997, Minneapolis. Madison and Cunanan arrived from San Diego for a weekend stay at Madison's apartment. Madison picked him up from the airport. Many people were concerned and they warned Madison that Cunanan didn't seem like himself. He said that he just needed kind of something to sort himself out. Jennifer Weinberg was the caretaker of Harmony Lofts in Minneapolis, where David Madison lived. Sometime on Sunday, the 27th of April, something had finally pushed Cunanan to a point of no return. Bitter with betrayal and driven by jealousy, a vicious argument ensued between Jeffrey Trail, David Madison, and Andrew Cunanan. This had fatal consequences. Andrew found a claw hammer in the apartment and started bludgeoning Jeffrey Trail. Following this attack, Cunanan calmly rolled Jeffrey Trail's body up in a rug and pushed it unceremoniously behind the sofa as if no one would find it out. After spending 2 days in the apartment and with no apparent plan of what to do next, Cunanan fled the gruesome scene with Madison. Cunanan's spontaneous murder of Trail happened so quickly that Madison was unable to comprehend what had happened. He didn't even try to intervene. That's the kind of thing, psychopaths are able to do with their powers of persuasion. A few days later, Jennifer Weinberg received some worrisome news. There were 2 missed call or rather voice messages from co-workers of David Madison, and they were very concerned because he had not shown up for work and people were looking for him. So she knocked on the door and no one answered. So she used her master key to unveil the horrifying scene. Jeffrey Trail had become Andrew Cunanan's first victim. May the 2nd, Rush City. 2 fishermen were scouting an area to put a tent so they could come up to fish. When they looked down by the lake, they saw what they thought was a body, an unidentified deceased white male. Soon the Minneapolis police got involved and stated that they were looking for a person that matched the description by the name of David Madison. David Madison was now victim number 2. Police on the scene pieced together how events unfolded. And at some point in conversation, David realized that he was in trouble with Mr. Cunanan, and so he jumped out of the car. And around this time, Andrew Cunanan shot him point blank in the back, and he fell, like kind of face down, and went into the lake. After killing David Madison, Cunanan's rampage gathered pace, and it took him 450 miles southeast of Chicago to the door of 72-year-old property millionaire Lee Miglin. This was going to be his most vicious slaughter so far. Andrew Cunanan's killing spree had begun in Minneapolis, where he had bludgeoned to death his first victim, Jeffrey Trails. 60 miles later, he killed David Madison, and now he was on an even darker turn. May the 3rd, 1997, Chicago. Lee Miglin was a wealthy property developer, well respected and well recognized in the city. No one was sure what drove Cunanan to his door, although some speculate that they had met years before in California. Whatever Cunanan's motive was, maybe motivation, revenge, retribution, or simply robbery, till date no one knows what it was. At some point over the May weekend, Miglin succumbed to what his elderly mother described as the worst death than Christ himself. Cunanan overpowered Mr. Miglin, tied him up, put a sheet over him, and tortured him. This was a very cruel death. In fact, in some ways, way crueler than the death of his two friends earlier. The way that Cunanan killed Mr. Miglin is quite different from how generally spree killers often kill their victims. And this is not because he wanted to indiscriminately shoot him. This was an effort taken by Cunanan because he got pleasure out of this. And now he was engaged in overkilling, and now he also was getting a lot of sexual gratification from what he was doing. Miglin had become Andrew Cunanan's third victim, and now FBI had entered the chase. 3 dead bodies had earned Cunanan the label armed and extremely dangerous. He continued to evade capture. Despite the trace on Miglin's car phone, Andrew took off in Miglin's Lexus. A countrywide APB had been issued for Cunanan's arrest. This Lexus made Cunanan need another vehicle at any cost. May the 8th, Pennsville, New Jersey, 765 miles from Chicago. Fence Point Cemetery. William Reese was a caretaker in Fence Point Cemetery and was working over there since the last 15 years. That fateful day, William Reese was locking up for the day, and Cunanan stopped his car, jumped out, and asked William Reese if he could possibly have a glass of water. The good man that William Reese was took this really scary person into his house, and before even he could give him the glass of water, Andrew pulled out his gun and shot Bill. Bill was murdered, and Cunanan claimed his victim number 4. May the 12th, 1997. Andrew Cunanan has arrived in Miami, Florida. He's getting ready to shock a generation. Bambi was a perfect place to harbor a chameleon like Cunanan. Every killer who commits multiple homicides has kind of a comfort zone. Most spree killers travel, but they like to stay within their own community because they know the place very well. They know how to get away with murder in that place. But there are few exceptions. Andrew Cunanan was one of them. He was no multiple personality, but he had the skill that very few people have, that he could change his appearance to look like dozens of other people. And he was America's most wanted man, and yet he kind of hid in plain sight. And apart from even changing the looks, he didn't really make any efforts to disguise himself. He paid for a month's rent in advance, staying at Normandy Plaza, and he was kind of living in plain sight around the beaches of Miami. He needed some funds and he decided to go to a pawn shop where he would exchange one of the gold coins he had taken from Mr. Milan's house for $200 in cash. He was obliged to provide 2 pieces of ID. The only ID he had was his real name and real address where he was staying in Normandy Plaza, which he actually gave. And yet again, Cunanan had taken a risk and gotten away with it. The pawn shop passed on the forms as required to the Miami police, which lay there unnoticed. There was really nobody looking for him in Miami. Nobody thought he was here. He was out in Miami like a normal citizen, minding his own business for at least 2 months. It could be seen that perhaps he targeted Versace as an element of self-loathing against being homosexual and the gay community that he had now turned against. There was also the belief that he thought he was HIV positive and he wanted to take it out on a symbolism for homosexual culture. Versace would be an ideal target that would bring everything together in one tumultuous storm. At 8:55 a.m., Andrew Cunanan shot dead one of the world's most famous fashion designers at point blank range. Cunanan was now the most wanted man in the world. There was a massive police manhunt which began, and the clues weren't hard to find. William Reese's truck had been left in a nearby car park. Over there, the police discovered the clothes and the witnesses, and they had described that the clothes were like kind of lying next to the truck. And he went out the fire exit and got into a taxi cab and fled. It was like a really huge manhunt. Everything stopped in Miami. The warmth of Miami streets was replaced by cold dread and panic. For 8 days after the murder, the trial had gone cold. 23rd of July 1997, Ocean Drive, Miami. Time was running out for Cunanan. Caretaker Fernando Carrera had stopped by to check on a vacant Indian Creek houseboat moved 2.5 miles from Versace's mansion on Ocean Drive. This was where Andrew Cunanan had sought refuge. He was almost making his last stand, but he didn't think he had much faith that police would catch up with him because he had very low opinion about law enforcement. They were clearly inferior to him and they had knocked in a very good job because they were not able to catch him so far. Carrera identified the person and he called the authorities. The authorities responded incredibly quickly this time, and the moment they came over there, they heard a shot. There was a standoff of a couple of hours during this, and there was no reaction from Cunanan. They decided to load a tear gas into the vessel, and there they found that it was his 6th victim. No, not the caretaker, but he had killed himself. He shot himself before the police could get him with a single gunshot to the right side of his head. He was in control over how he would go. Nobody else was going to take his life or his liberty, and he chose a very Hollywood glamorous way to die. Random terror brought by Andrew Cunanan was over. It seemed he was on a suicidal rampage, I feel, initially to begin with. Like he intended from the beginning to kill himself, but first he was going to get even with all those wealthy men. The kind of things Andrew wished for, the kind of places he wanted to put himself, and the kind of stories he told, he wanted to live up to that. Cunanan's death brought with him mix of emotions for those who had been affected by him. He journeyed from being his father's loving child to a class clown with a fabricated family background to an enigmatic life and soul of every party he attended, and finally to one of the most brutal spree killers in the American history. Andrew Cunanan had to be the center of attention. In his school yearbook, next to his picture, he prophetically wrote a poem in French, Will the deluge, simply put, after me, the storm ends. In the end, he assured of having his place and infamy, and that's what he exactly wanted. For more such conspiracy theories and murder mysteries, follow me on Instagram, anonymousartist212. And I hope you enjoyed this. Kindly give me your feedback and subscribe and like and share this video, and I'll be more than happy. Until we meet in the next episode, stay safe. Bye bye.